The European Union is trying to woo Turkey into helping stop the flood of refugees into Europe. Turkey is being offered incentives, including cash and new talks on EU membership. So, can and will Turkey deliver? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Shiulie Ghosh. $3.4 billion. That's the price the European Union is willing to pay to secure its borders. EU leaders met in Brussels on Thursday to once again discuss the migrant and refugee crisis that has dominated headlines this year. Almost 600,000 people have reached the EU by sea since January, and countries across Europe are struggling to accommodate the new arrivals. Many of them are Syrian refugees. The main route they take is through Turkey and on to Kos in Greece. Their path continues through Macedonia and Serbia into Hungary, then on to Austria and Germany. Most of these refugees say it's their final destination. More than 100,000 refugees entered Germany in August. A total of 800,000 refugees and migrants are expected in Germany this year. That's 4 times last year's level. So it's no surprise that European countries say they're feeling overwhelmed. And since it borders Syria, Turkey says it can help stem the flow of refugees, but only with some aid and diplomatic sweeteners. Neve Barker sets up the story for us from Brussels.
European leaders arrived in Brussels facing multiple challenges. The war in Syria, conflict in Ukraine and the aftershocks of the Greek bailout saga have put the 28-nation bloc under mounting strain. But it's the unrelenting refugee crisis that continues to dominate European politics. More than 500,000 people, many of them refugees from Syria, have arrived in the EU this year. A large number have travelled through Turkey to Europe's shores. But now, a preliminary agreement with Turkey to help reduce the number of people attempting to make it to Europe.
We received a report very early this morning that there had been an outcome of the negotiations, and we were then able to reach an agreement this evening with regards to the exact shape of the joint action plan.
Under the draft plan, Turkey would receive $3.4 billion in aid in return for clamping down on the numbers of people crossing its territory heading towards the European Union. The money would be used on tightening security, but it would also be used on creating greater incentives for people to stay in Turkey, greater levels of integration and better living conditions also. But as well as the money, there's also talk of liberalising visa restrictions on Turkish nationals entering the European Union, conditions not everyone in the EU is prepared to accept, including the French President François Hollande.
Il ne faudrait pas qu'au prétexte de vouloir
We cannot have a situation where, in exchange for Turkey helping us to hold back refugees that are on its territory, we liberalise the visa system with no conditions attached, allowing visas for individuals whose identities we don't know and can't check. So there will be a process with a lot of conditions attached. It's normal to discuss with the Turks, but France and other countries will pay attention to make sure that conditions are not only set, but also respected.
But with Europe under pressure to come up with a lasting solution to the refugee crisis, the EU may have little choice but to concede to Turkey's demands. In return for Turkish help with the refugee crisis, the European Union's also promised to start new talks with Turkey about eventually joining the EU. But in the short term, there's the question of where billions of dollars in aid to Turkey will come from. The EU's still suffering from the effects of the Eurozone crisis. Europe may have to dig deep if it wants greater control over its borders. Neve Barker, Al Jazeera, Brussels.
Well, let's bring in our guests today. In Ankara, Abdullah Bozkurt, columnist for the Turkish newspaper today's Zaman and specialist on Turkish domestic politics. In Brussels, Anne-Elisabeth Collett, director of the Migration Policy Institute Europe, and in Paris. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, political commentator and columnist for the Telegraph newspaper in the UK. Good to have all of you with us. Elizabeth, let me start with you in Brussels. The very fact that the EU are now talking about easing visa restrictions on Turkey, that shows just how desperately they need to solve this problem, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, visa liberalisation has been discussed for a number of years with Turkey, but slowed down considerably in the last couple of years. And large countries like France and Germany have in the past been very nervous to consider visa liberalisation with Turkey. But the nature of the flows coming from the region over the last 3 or 4 months and the lack of capacity in some asylum systems across the European Union has really driven member states to think differently about the relationship with Turkey and to put things on the table that they may not have put on the table before, including financing, visa liberalisation and opening new chapters up in the accession process.
But isn't this just a way of dumping the refugee problem onto Turkey?
I think there's certainly an externalisation agenda here as well. I think there's a concern that the large flows are unsustainable on the one hand. On the other hand, there's also a concern that people are using smugglers and traffickers and taking very dangerous routes to Europe. And one way to think about preventing that is to improve the situation for those people in Turkey, as well as prevent them using those smuggling and trafficking networks to come to the European Union. So that's one part of it. But without sustainable livelihoods, without real options in the long term for those people who subsequently aren't able to make it to the European Union, there is a question mark over whether this is a viable prospect in the longer term.
OK, Abdullah in Ankara, Turkey hasn't stopped that many refugees at its borders so far. Presumably it's only considering the plan to tighten up its borders because of the incentives that could be offered.
I think Turkey has been doing a lot in terms of retaining refugees in Turkey. Every day the Turkish military is publishing the official data about 1,000 people on the Syrian border getting caught trying to make it way to Turkish side. But it's very difficult challenge for a single country to deal with it. And Europe is stepping up to the plate only when they face a huge wave of the refugees who lost their hopes after 5 years of the conflict, and they have no prospect that's credible for them to get some hope for coming back to Syria or Iraq or other countries. So I mean, with the sweeteners, they are throwing some sort of funds and visa facilitation or liberalization prospect is only a short gap measures to handle this issue.
But is this something Turkey can do?
Not only financial.
Is this something Turkey can do? Can it stop more refugees at its borders? Can it make a home for more refugees inside its borders? Can it cooperate with Greece, for example? I mean, the kind of things that the EU want it to do, is Turkey capable of delivering?
There is always room for the improvement, no doubt about that, and we can always do more. And the Turkish authorities and the custom border officials already working with the Greece or the Bulgarian, custom officials on both sides. But I mean, when you face a wave of the, refugees who have, who risk everything to go to Europe, then how do you stop that? And if you stop through the, the border gates, they find some other ways. They even venture to the sea to make it to other side. So this is a human, tragedy, and Europe needs to share this burden in terms of repatriation. So give some prospect for these refugees, not just money. I mean, we are talking about 3 billion euro. Some of them is actually coming from the structural funds that was promised to Turkey as part of the accession process. You can add some funds on that, but this is not only a financial issue. You also need to, get some of the refugees and settle them to Germany, France, and other countries. We are talking about 2.5 million refugees just in Turkey. Officially, Turkey is a country that has the largest refugee population in the world today. I mean, there are a lot of different dimensions to this problem, and I don't see that's being dealt in the current agreement we saw.
Okay, well, let's talk more about the draft plan. Anne-Elisabeth, EU leaders are talking about visa-free restrictions for Turks in the Schengen area. Could happen next year. France vehemently against this, isn't it?
France is against this, but at the same time, most European countries were the one that has already one of the easiest visa exchanges with Turkey. French tourists go into Turkey without having to ask for a visa, which is not the case, for instance, of British tourists, and there's a circulation. So it's more a question of residence visa, staying for more than 6 months, so coming to do business. It's an entirely different situation. That's one thing. And it is seen as a counterpart for Turkey's help, which quite frankly is absolutely necessary, because Turkey has got I think the biggest border with Syria. So Turkey is the first port of call.
So Turkey has a lot of leverage right now.
Oh, yes. It's possibly the best leverage Turkey has had in 10 years. And what's also very interesting is that we're perfectly aware that Turkey, until about three years ago, had a booming economy, had incredible growth between 8 and 10% a year, and it's been going down in recent years. And so Turkey has more needs. And what really worries us is that as long as Turkey is booming and prosperous, it's an attractive place. But if itself starts knowing a bit of immigration, in addition to all the immigration that's going through it, it's going to face a much more difficult situation and be less inclined to do whatever it is that Europeans would like it to do. So now is probably the window in which we can still make a deal with Turkey.
OK, well, Turkey has been trying to join the EU since 1987. Negotiations are still ongoing. Some EU leaders are uneasy about accepting Turkey into the bloc. President Erdogan has criticised their reluctance.
So if it can't happen without Turkey, why can't you take Turkey into the EU? They say we made a mistake on NATO. Let's not make the same mistake on the EU. That is the problem. But many of the European Union member countries are far behind us. We are more advanced in terms of economic progress and meeting the membership criteria. But unfortunately, they're not sincere.
Abdullah, President Erdogan quite annoyed that the EU is still questioning Turkey's right to join the EU. Is he expecting that some of the obligations that are required will now be waived in return for Turkey's help with the refugee crisis?
Well, I mean, if you look at the European, accession process for Turkey, the criteria is very clear. The refugee has never been part of that criteria. And all of a sudden, with this deal, there is a new criteria injected to the EU negotiation process for a candidate country. I don't think that's an acceptable position for Turkey. But from our end, I mean, in Ankara, the current government, both the Prime Minister Davutoğlu and President Erdogan, seems to have, desperate to strike this deal, because Turkey is heading towards an election 2 weeks from now, and they need something to sell to the public. So the visa liberalization issue, although is not as certain because it's going to be assessed down the road next year, even if you sign the readmission agreement, but it's something that they can sell to their constituency during the election campaign. And another dimension to that from domestic political perspective of Turkey is both Davutoğlu and Erdogan has been complaining recently that they are not getting international spotlight. As a statesman, Davutoğlu was in New York recently, and he openly acknowledged that he and the President Erdogan sort of blacklisted in the international spotlight. So with this deal, they're hoping to get an invitation to the high-level summits of the EU leaders that was part of the negotiation process. And it appears the EU has given a green light to that in exchange for Turkey to keeping the refugees in Turkey and not letting them to go Europe.
Okay, let me bring in Elisabeth in.
Refugees.
Let me bring Elisabeth in Brussels, because as we know, Elisabeth, EU leaders seldom agree completely on everything. Are they in agreement here? Is Turkey a country that they will do deals with, even if some leaders find it maybe hard to stomach the idea of speeding up Turkey's membership to join, or application to join the EU?
So I think the first things first is to understand that this EU action plan that's been published today is deeply provisional. this still has to undergo, I think, a lot more negotiation on both sides. I think the Turkish still see drawbacks to this and hosting what could become a very large refugee population, and the EU has its own concerns, not least about visa liberalisation, but also about the accession process and the behaviour of the Turkish government overall. I think what we need to also understand is that some of the things that lead us towards visa liberalisation are security focused, and many states have concerns about security in addition to the numbers of people who might arrive. Certainly when there was visa liberalisation with the Western Balkans, that was of deep concern. Because numbers from the Western Balkans rose significantly and many of those claimed asylum. So there are lots of different complications with this factor. EU countries rarely agree on everything, they rarely agree on anything. And so we still have to think about getting all EU 28 on the same page at the same time as dealing with a Turkey that currently, in geopolitical terms, holds all the cards. And while visa liberalisation might be a significant carrot, I'm not sure it would really be in recompense for the large numbers of refugees that potentially they might end up hosting.
Okay, so we've talked about what Turkey wants. Let's talk in more detail about the actual plan, which, as Elizabeth points out, is very provisional. But Anne-Elisabeth, one of the things they're talking about is giving $3.4 billion to Turkey to help them tighten borders, but also to help give Syrian refugees a life inside Turkey, so that they don't feel the need to go onwards. Is that something that can be achieved? Because there's a huge number of refugees, and trying to educate them all, perhaps finding them employment, that's a tall order.
Well, as far as I understand, those refugees are middle-class people. They have good education. They are professionals, many of them. We're not talking about people who would be very difficult to assimilate. And in many ways, there would be a sort of natural fit of two countries that until the war had points in common, good education system on both sides, and people who had aspirations, people who speak foreign languages. They possibly do not speak Turkish, but they certainly speak English. It's even one of the reasons why they want to come to France. They don't speak French so much. And so it is perfectly understandable. It is a situation that is, first, unprecedented since 1945, and second, it's a situation that is open-ended. We don't know how long the war will last. Turkey is now part of the coalition. The Europeans have not been short to notice that being part of the coalition against Daesh has meant for Turkey mostly bombing Kurdish positions, and that's not something that the Europeans think is really on the level. But we understand that not assimilate all the refugees.
I can see that both our guests want to get in and say something there. Elizabeth, let's come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been talking about the refugee crisis in Syria because, of course, that's on top of everyone's mind right now. But what we also have to understand is this is a mixed flow coming from a lot of different places to the European Union. There are people coming from unstable countries like Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. There are also people coming who may be escaping poverty and coming for other reasons that would not entitle them to protection. And part of this agreement with EU-Turkey is not just about preventing people from arriving to the European Union, but also initiating the readmission agreement and really implementing the readmission agreement that would allow the EU to more easily send not just Turkish nationals and not just Syrian nationals back to Turkey, but also all sorts of other populations that have passed through Turkey on their way to the European Union. So we shouldn't just be looking at this as a simple refugee population. This is a complex mixed flow of many nationalities. And so the burden on Syria is also a little bit more complex,
but the vast
as well as the integration challenges
refugees
for the European Union, much larger than just thinking about middle-class people with qualifications that may or may not be recognised. I think we shouldn't underestimate
the vast majority of
complexity.
Refugees are from Syria, and it's likely that they're going to increase because you now have the Russian airstrikes in Syria, you have the Syrian army offensive going on around Aleppo. Abdullah, what do you think? You mentioned the problems with the $3.4 billion that the EU was talking about giving to Turkey. Is that enough money to deal with the refugees that are already there and the refugees that are inevitably going to turn up in the future?
Well, Turkey has already spent $8.5 billion so far, much more than the EU actually is promising to give to Turkey now. And this is a cynical approach, and some of the funds is already earmarked for Turkey as sort of pre-accession structural funds. So they are just, moving from one column to the another and, redressing as a refugee, assistance. But it's not only funding issue. I mean, there are almost 400,000 kids, Syrian refugee kids in Turkey. They are not getting any education, primary education we are talking here. They don't have a prospect for the employment opportunities. And when you listen to the EU official, like the European Union Commissioner President Juncker, he summarized very well. We want these refugees to get retained in Turkey. We also want to resettle them, the ones that were in Europe, back to Turkey. I mean, this is kind of unfair deal. We already signed the readmission agreement back in 2013 in exchange of the visa liberalization roadmap. Just for anecdotal information, Turkey kind of singled out among all the candidate countries that's not getting a visa waiver. All the others actually got the visa waiver without the roadmap. And Turkey is sort of discriminated in this process. And all of a sudden we have a refugee issue, and they want to inject the refugee issue in the accession process as well. I mean, if you want to deal with the refugee,
Let's just take a look at the figures involved, because, as we've said, around 130,000 Syrians claimed refugee status in Europe last year. However, the UN says that's only around 10% of the people escaping the war in Syria. Most of them end up in neighbouring Turkey, as we said, but also Lebanon and Jordan. Almost 630,000 Syrian refugees are registered in Jordan. More than 1 million are in Lebanon. That's around 30% of its population. And almost 2 million Syrian refugees have settled in Turkey. That's about 4 million registered Syrian refugees in these three countries, compared to 500,000 who've gone to Europe since the crisis began. Anne-Elisabeth, Angela Merkel has said there should be more burden sharing of the refugees. I mean, this is a problem when you come to public perceptions of where these refugees are going, aren't there? It's quite a difficult sell to the public to say we should be taking in more refugees, but clearly there is a crisis and something has to be done.
Well, first of all, we are now seeing Angela Merkel withstanding a terrible backlash, political backlash in her own country, because lots and lots of politicians and the public are now saying that she was very imprudent in saying the borders are open to up to 1 million refugees, the borders of Germany. And she has an admirable stance, but it is a stance that is probably going to harm her very much. It might make her fall. Second, the French attitude is entirely different. We have actually been trying. We've been sending people to centers in Munich and other places, trying to get refugees to come to France, but they don't want to because they know that there are no jobs in France and they do not speak French. We've seen for years masses of people at Sangatte near Calais trying to get into England for exactly that reason. And we were fascinated that over the mission to bring back 1,000 refugees a few weeks back in France, the envoys, the special envoys of the French administration could only gather 600. And France will not take that many refugees, but that's also because they don't want to come. Again, I understand that these are not just Syrians, but when it comes to the Syrians immediately, they are intelligent people. They've taken a great deal of difficulties in their stride. They're educated and they know what they want now. And that's not necessarily coming to all sorts of places, and I'm not sure it is they want to go to Turkey for that matter. I mean,
it just seems difficult to believe that there will be any kind of solution to a problem that has so many refugees to deal with, and probably more in the future. But we're coming to the end of the show, but let me give the final word to Abdullah, seeing as you are in Ankara, and Turkey, as we've established, has a lot of leverage right now. It is in a position where the EU is asking for Turkey's help. But do you think that this plan that is being discussed, can be successful in stopping the flow of refugees into Europe?
I don't think so. It's a short-term measure. and it doesn't address, medium and long-term implication of this refugee problem. I remember back in 2013, UNHCR had Guterres was telling to Turkey and others, we need to find a way to resettle these refugees to different countries. And he was asking all the countries, willing ones, to accept some of them to their own countries. It didn't happen. I mean, just retaining them in Turkey, in Jordan, in Lebanon, and other places is not going to resolve the issue. You need to have a comprehensive roadmap to address, the health issue, education issue, the crime issue, and give them some prospect to these refugees, either in Turkey or other countries. They have to find a way to integrate themselves to the host societies. They are not going to be guests anymore, because so many of the kids are born in Turkey and other, countries that are hosting refugees. I don't see a comprehensive plan either on the Turkish side or the European Union side.
This is clearly an issue that we could spend a lot of time discussing. I'm so sorry we've run out of time, but I want to give a big thank you to all of you for coming on and discussing this. My guests, Abdullah Bozkurt, Elizabeth Collett and Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on the programme's page of our website, aljazeera.com. You can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story. Thanks for watching from me, Shiulie Ghosh, and all the team here. Bye for now.